So just wanted to introduce our first two speakers here. To my far left is Ben Kimball. Ben's been with the USGA since 2005 and is the director of the U.S. Women's Open and U.S. Amateur Championships. He also has served as the staff member in charge at the U.S. Junior Amateur and U.S. Senior Amateur Championships. Prior to joining the USGA, Ben worked for the American Junior Golf Association, serving as the director of tournament operations. Ben graduated from the University of South Carolina, just asking about college football, and currently resides in Morris Plains, New Jersey, with his wife and daughter. And they're actually expecting their second child in about 2 months, conveniently timed to coincide with this year's U.S. Open. And to my immediate left is Dr. Michael Hurdzan. Mike is a golf course architect, author, retired U.S. Army colonel, past president of the American Society of Golf Course Architects, and an internationally recognized authority on golf course environmental issues. The recipient of the Old Tom Morris Award and the Donald Ross Award, and also a member of the USGA's Museum Committee. Dr. Design has written 6 books and hundreds of articles on golf course design, and his book, Golf Course Architecture, has been printed in 4 different languages and is considered one of the universal textbooks on golf course design. Mike attended The Ohio State University, just like some guy named Nicholas who's getting a room named after him next door. And Mike now makes his residence in Columbus, where he is a managing partner at Hurdzan Golf. He's also one of the architects of Erin Hills, the host site of the 2017 U.S. Open Championship. And I'd like to start there. I'll take a seat here in a second, but to get us going, Mike, there are a finite number of great golfing grounds in the world, and a lot of them were snatched up by some of the early architects. So there's not that many when we come to the present day. Can you talk a little bit about the background of Erin Hills and what you saw when you looked at the land for the first time?
There's Erin Hills, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is northwest of Milwaukee, about 40 minutes, probably 30 or 35 miles or so. And that area north of the interstate and up towards the Dells was all glacial moraine, the kettle moraine area. So when the glacier receded 10,000 years ago, it left all these little sand hills that virtually look like the lynx land, like authentic lynx land, only it was formed by the glacier instead of the ocean and the wind. And that area is absolutely, there's 1,000 golf courses up there, sites, much like there would be in the sand hills. But this particular one was identified by a friend of ours, Bob Lang, who was the original developer, and he recognized the wonderful rollingness of this terrain and the well-drained qualities of it. And being close enough to Milwaukee, he believed that it could be a great golf course venue. And so we were hired, that was me and my former partner Dana Fry and Ron Witten, our friend, were selected to put a golf course on that. And the original concept was a $50 green fee golf course that would be the poor man's Whistling Straits. And it evolved over time, and now it's not a poor man's golf course, but it is a very good golf course. And we're very proud of the fact that it's going to host the Open. But it is an extraordinarily natural golf course. Originally, we didn't change the grades any more than a foot. So what you see there is what the glaciers left. And the job that we had that was so difficult was trying to decide which of those multiple golf courses that could be on that site was the best for what the purposes were and the budgets.
Mike, I'll stay with you for just a second. What were some of the biggest challenges designing and building Erin Hills? And how is the course, you mentioned some of the evolution from a $50 daily fee course to what it is today. How has the course evolved since it opened about 9 years ago in 2006?
Okay. The biggest challenge outside of Ron was really trying to select where the golf course should fit in that land. And those of you who will either watch it on TV or have been there or will have played it, you understand what I mean when you see it. It just seems like it calls out for. So the challenge really was to select those places where the golf course would fit. That was the biggest challenge. And we used the Old Tom Morris method, and we tried to find the green sites that looked like would be the best. And then we would go backwards to figure out, okay, should it play from this angle or that angle, and where should the tees be? And and then to go ahead and create a golf course that had some uniformity to it. And so that was the biggest challenge. What has evolved is as the original designers, envisioned it as a real, true links golf course. And since all of us have played links golf courses, we don't mind blind shots. I mean, that's part of links golf, in my opinion. And we had one particular hole that we patterned after the Dell hole from La Hinch, which was a blind par 3. Well, North American golfers don't share the same reverence that we do for blind golf holes, and it was severely criticized. But fortunately, we had built 19 holes, so as it turned out, in the ensuing years, that hole was eliminated, and now the 19th hole is really has become the 9th hole at the golf course, a fiendish little par 3 that is going to be the closing hole. And then the other things that were done were basically to open up some more sight lines, to remove some of the blindness that we had left on par 4s and par 5s purposely, and to try to make it a little more accommodating to what expectations were. It is an all-walking golf course, and we originally saw it again as having golf cars and people being able to use it, and so that another evolution that's taken place. But outside of there was 2 greens that got rebuilt, 3 and 4, and they were okay, but one wasn't challenging enough, and the other one was a little more too challenging. So those 2 greens, Ben knows the golf course exceedingly well, which you'll find out in a few moments. And so those greens have been modified and a few bunkers added. But basically, the golf course has not changed dramatically from what it was.
Mm-hmm. Correct me if I'm wrong, Michael. There's still a landmark at Erin Hills from where that par 3 used to be. There's a bell, I think, at the bottom of the hill that's still there. And I heard a funny story about that bell. Happened to be playing around a golf there before the 2011 U.S. Amateur, and was stopped, and they said, "Hey, take a look at this. This is where the blind shot par 3 used to be." And they say, "Take a look at the ironwork on the side of the bell here." And I'm looking at it, and it looked very familiar. And it's the clover leaf, which ended up being the logo that became Erin Hills.
Yes.
So really neat story there. So there's that par 3 still in there somehow.
Yeah, it is. Well, in my mind it is, and in my heart it is. Again, and there used to be the other landmark that is not there. It used to be a little white rock that it was, what was it called? Witten's Rock or something like that? Ron's Rock, maybe it was called. And as the hole would get moved, and let me describe this hole for you. You had a tee that was up on a hill, and then there was a valley, and in the whole valley was a golf green. I mean, you literally could not miss. If you could get it over the hill, you were on the green. And the white rock told you where on this long, narrow green the hole was located. So if you played it over the rock, in theory, you were in line to be somewhere near where the hole location was. And, I can imagine how much fun it would be to walk over that hill and go, "Oh, my God, there's only 3 balls there, one's in a hole, and now let's figure out which one it is." So we took a little of the drama out of that, and it's okay.
We mentioned that there are a couple of USGA championships that have been played in Erin Hills already. We had the Women's Amateur Public Links there in 2008, and then in 2011 it hosted the U.S. Amateur, and Ben, you served as the director of the championship there at Erin Hills in 2011. Talk about what are some of the differences in course setup between setting up a WAPL, setting up a U.S. Amateur, and then what might be done in 2017 for the U.S. Open?
Well, when Michael was talking about how they started with the greens and worked their way backwards, that's probably how I operate in setting up the Women's Open or the U.S. Amateur on an annual basis. Just given the players that are playing into those greens, you've got to look at what does the green give you, what is being asked of the player to get into this area, and then work your way back. So I think, for when the WAPL was there, certainly the women, the ball flight is a little bit shallower. They don't spin the ball as much. You had to be a little bit more careful from the total distance, where you were putting hole locations. When we moved to the U.S. Amateur, we had certainly had firmer putting green surfaces. The gentlemen hit the ball much higher, spin rates much higher. So we were able to be a little bit more aggressive in how we set up the golf course. And that's once again, you think when you're doing a setup, you should work tee to green because that's what golf tells you to do. You play from the tee and, put the ball in the hole. But for what I do for a living, I have to work in the opposite direction, very similar to, how Michael was started in Erin Hills.
And, when we're going there for the 2017 U.S. Open, obviously that will be 72 holes of stroke play. When you were setting up in 2011, you had 2 rounds of stroke play, and then it went to match play. How different is it for you to set up, either at Erin Hills or at other courses, for match play versus stroke play courses?
That's a question I do get asked a lot, and it is very different. It's a match play event. It's not a stroke play event. The goal is to get 64 players to match play. Particularly at the U.S. Amateur at Erin Hills, we had 312 players we had to get around between 2 golf courses. The co-host stroke play venue was Blue Mountain, more towards the center of Milwaukee. So, I mean, it's quite different in that, pace of play is a concern. Mm-hmm. We've got to get the golf in 2 days. We want to make sure that we're also identifying the best 64 players that get into match play as well. I mean, that's the most important thing. However, in the first 2 days, if stroke play, you're not going to give away all your secrets for the rest of the week. There's some things that you want to keep in the tank, some strategy that you want to only show in the match play portion of the championship. I think that's important. And the great thing about Erin Hills was there's so much flexibility with teeing grounds. You had a lot of great options for hole locations that ultimately, you may start off a little slow and ramp up as you get towards the end of the championship. It's all about those last 2 players on that final day, making sure that is, when that match is over, that we've truly identified who our national champion is. So yes, the stroke play portion is important, but we're not letting all secrets out of the bag. We're not going to mess around too much because we know it's important to get everybody in and get down to the 64 and move on.
I think you can both speak to this next point. You've both talked a little bit about what the course is like, but how much of an effect, we'll start with you, Mike, is Mother Nature out at a place like Erin Hills? And then Ben, after that, maybe you can talk a little bit about how that affects your course setup.
Well, one of the things that was purposely done there, because the golf course tended to have a links feel to it anyway, as a lot of trees were taken out. And they were little small trees that had volunteered from when the farmer had been using it there. So it wasn't like there was one massive oak tree that we debated for 3 years before it finally came down. But other than that, we wanted to make wind a very real factor. And when you see the golf courses or pictures of the golf course, we took out most of the little scrub trees, and so wind is an extraordinarily important factor. The other thing is the slope. The golf course in places is steep, and we tried to place use those slopes as part of that strategy as well, so that if you could read the landscape, if you will, and play the ball to that place on that fairway, it would release and would make for a much better angle or a shorter shot coming in. And we were trying to make it a dry, fast, firm golf course, much like you'll see at Chambers Bay this year. And so the biggest environmental factor, I think, was making sure the wind got in there and the place stayed dry.
The one thing that we can't control is Mother Nature, and as my colleague says all the time, we don't play golf in a dome. If we did, everything would be rosy red, but we don't. And every single time that I step up on a teeing ground, if you're not thinking about what Mother Nature is doing, then you're making a big mistake. In Erin Hills and likewise with Chambers Bay, the wind is the invisible hazard, as Mr. Jones refers to. I mean, it's there. You got to be conscious of what you're doing every single time. You put the tee markers in the ground, or you walk away from that putting green, putting that hole location in the ground, saying, is this going to work if conditions get windy? I'm not an agronomist. I don't claim to be. But I know that greens don't necessarily speed up during the day. They tend to get a little bit slower. However, wind can change that and impact how the championship is being played. So every single time that I step on a teeing ground, I got to know where that wind is coming from, whether it's the prevailing wind or it's shifted. it makes a huge impact on setup. And needless to say, you know, if you get into a situation, or at least when we get into a situation, whether it's the U.S. Open all the way to, you know, a boys or girls junior or the senior women's amateur, if you're not paying attention to what Wynn's doing, and you know, you're making a huge mistake. It impacts everything. You know, you can have 71 good holes at the U.S. Open, you know, and make one bad mistake, not judging Wynn and what it could possibly do, and ruin the 72nd hole. The championship is not a success. It's a failure in our eyes. So we have to be mindful of what Mother Nature does, you know, and it's usually working against us, not always in favor, but it's just part of the game.
Let me add one more thing to that too, Michael. Just as Bob and his team did at Chambers, we use fine fescue grasses throughout the golf course, and which tend to allow for a lot more ball roll. They can be a lot drier. And all we were trying to do is accent the impact of wind and slope by that choice of grasses, as well as being more environmentally correct.
And I'll pick up on that. A big consideration in the design of Erin Hills. First of all, how would you define sustainability and what some of the principles are behind it? And second, how does Erin Hills in specific reflect this?
Well, there's a couple kinds of sustainability. There's an economic sustainability that we hear a lot about, and there's an environmental sustainability. And some businesses, those two can be separate, but in golf, they're together. And the golf course has to be economically sustainable, or it's not going to be, and it should be environmentally sustainable. I think that the EPA or maybe the World Environmental Organization has defined the classic definition of sustainability is using today's resources without depriving future generations of them. And so in golf course architecture, I would paraphrase that to say that it means creating a golf course that uses the least amount of water, fertilizer, pesticide, fossil fuel to produce a marketable round of golf, but yet create a very diverse environmental ecosystem. And that's what our definition of sustainability is, because it has to be economically sustainable as well as environmentally. And and I think the second part of that question, as far as what did we do at Erin Hills, is that purposely we limited the irrigation. It's, you know, a lot of golf courses are 4 irrigation heads wide. We were 2 irrigation heads, and we had to fight to do that, to be frank. Ron and I had to argue like Dutch uncles, not to offend any Dutch people, but we had to argue strenuously because there were, no, it needs more, no, we put more irrigation in, you're going to use it, and we don't want you to. The choices of the grasses, there was a golf course where we say it was non-till, where we actually did not till the soil at all, simply went in and killed the weeds that were there and then overseeded right into the existing mat or turf that was there with the fescue. We tried to use minimal amounts of fertilizer to grow the grass. And the greens are bent grass, which is different than Chambers Bay will be, but that was a concession we were happy to make. So we took all of these steps as we went along to make sure that we used the least amount of water, fertilizer, pesticide, and fossil fuel to produce a very marketable golf course and have yet a very diverse environment that it's in.
And you mentioned some of the comparisons with Chambers Bay, the fine fescue on the course. Talk about it, and Bob will come up here and talk about it in a little bit, about Chambers, but what are some of the similarities and differences when people are watching this year's U.S. Open that you might also see in 2017 at Erin Hills?
Well, Bob and his group had to envision a golf course in a big hole and then create it. Whereas we had to envision a golf course on a bunch of humpy bumpy land and reveal it. And so theirs was more of an artistic approach, and the art is in hiding the art, which I think they've done exceedingly well, because when you see the golf course, it just looks like it's always been there. And in fact, those of us that saw before it was ever built know it was a big hole in the ground. And they did the same thing at Spanish Bay, by the way, which would probably be another comparable of, you know, taking an abused piece of ground into. So the similarities are the fact that we used fine fescue grasses. that we were trying to do for a firm, hard, dry, thinking person's golf course. Some of the differences would be that we use bent on the greens, whereas they used fine fescues.
And what's the difference between those two in putting?
Well, the bent grass greens will tend to hold an approach shot, a longer approach shot better. You can hit a ball with a lot of spin and make it check up pretty much where you want it to be if you hit it with enough spin and a right ball flight. With the fescue greens, you're going to have to read slopes. It's going to be almost like what we see at the British Open. You have to read the contour, hit the ball to the target area, and let the ball release to where you want it to be. A little bit different style of golf between those two. I would say that Erin Hills is wider than for the most part, just because we had 675 acres, and so it can be plenty wide, whereas Chambers is a little narrower. But and wind's a big factor there, so that'd be another similarity.
I think from my point of view, from 2015 to 2017, and you just said it, it's going to force the player to think. Force the player to think daily on every single hole. Certainly Mike Davis, who sets up our U.S. Open Championships, looks at each individual hole separately and tries to get the most out of it. That's just part of the 14-point philosophy that we have when setting up our Open Championships. But I really like the fact that daily at both Erin Hills and Chambers Bay, you can change the strategy throughout the entire golf course. You could play it 4 days in a row, and it's going to play a little bit different each day. And we expect out of our national champions that they should be able to overcome all that on top of the pressure of the prize money and the fame that comes with winning a U.S. Open Championship, that they can put all that together to conquer all. And I think that's really neat about both Chambers and 17. You really, really have to think your way around, and it provides us, those that are involved with setup, a wonderful opportunity to really kind of do what we think is best, which is really neat.
Let me add to that just momentarily, is that early on when there was a lot of talk about Erin Hills, is that there were some numbers reported how long the golf course could be, and of course we fought to not have those numbers out there because they're so misleading, and now I'm going to tell you what those numbers are, but it was in excess of 8,500 yards. If you were to go to the extreme back of Erin Hills, you could make the golf course 85. It was never intended to be that, never intended to play that way. But as I said, it was a process of revealing of a golf hole. So we would find the green location, we'd find the landing areas for where in the fairways where we wanted to be, and then we would find a good teeing ground, and you look over your shoulder and go, oh my God, there's another tee there. Oh, there's another tee there. And because all we were doing was just leveling off places and getting some irrigation to it, it was pulling the irrigation in. So all these tees were developed, but the intent, just as Ben said, was to maybe have a hole play at 620-yard par 5 one day and make it 540 the next. So now all of those fairway bunkers and hazards, you can't say, well, I can play it right at the right. No, if we move the tee up, you can hit it in the right bunker. You can't. That isn't your aiming point anymore. So it will be a thinking person's golf course, and I think that Mike Davis has said that the golf course will play at 7,600 yards, which is plenty long for a fescue golf course. Although, I mean, we saw those guys in the amateur take a 450-yard par 4 and hit a driver wedge, because they learned to read the slope and they knew where to hit it and where to release the ball, like on 10. As an example, which by the way was a new green as well. I'd forgotten that one. But yes, I think that that's the idea, is that give you total flexibility to set the golf course up the way you want.
I remember the par 4 17th hole, player hitting driver, it was 504 yards, player hitting driver 8-iron into that green at one point. And a lot of that had to do with how quick the fairways were moving, so on and so forth. But,
why don't you relate the story about Patrick Cantlay?
Well, it's interesting, talking about flexibility. I don't remember off the top of my head the total yardage for the 15th hole.
With 425 from the back.
425 from the very back in the afternoon of the final match between Patrick Cantlay from California and Kelly Craft from Texas. Patrick Cantlay had a 1-up lead coming to the 15th tee, and we had moved the tee markers all the way to about 255 to 265 on a forward teeing ground, really making it a kind of, I guess, a risk-reward drivable par 4 option. The green sits up high, falls off dramatically on the right-hand side, and Patrick, with a 1-up lead with a few holes to go at the U.S. Amateur, said the safe play for me, playing first, is to put it in the fairway, show my opponent that I'm safe, so that he's going to have to give it a rip and go for it because he's one down in the match with 3 to play. So Patrick pulls an 8-iron on a par 4 tee, pulls an 8-iron in the middle of the U.S. Amateur. Completely unexpected. You could tell that it had him a little rattled that, really, am I going to hit an 8-iron? The USGA is forcing me to hit an 8-iron. Hits an 8-iron, probably hits the worst 8-iron he's ever hit into his life, into, I don't know that it's a pot bunker, but a bunker right in the middle of the fairway there. Kelly Craft hits a beautiful shot up on or near the putting green surface, makes birdie. Cantlay makes par or bogey. I can't remember the exact score. Kelly Craft goes on to birdie the 16th hole. They have 17, and on 18, I think Kelly wins that as well to win the match 2 up. So it just goes to show you that they played that hole in the morning at around 420. And they probably walked off that green thinking when they reached the top of the hill there at the tee that it was going to play 420. And then they got there and they were like, what is going on? And as Mr. Jones said yesterday in a talk that he had to our staff, the player got right about here and we were already in his head.
Yeah.
So we tested his mental stability, which is part of kind of what we're doing. Not only physical ability, but mental stability is kind of part of the test that we put forth.
We always talk about it being the most comprehensive test in the game with the U.S. Open or the U.S. Amateur or whatever national championship it is. I'm going to do one more question, and then we're going to open it up to the crowd. We have a couple mics that'll be going around. So, my last question is, for years, Ben, it seemed like the U.S. Open course had a certain prototype. It was narrow fairways, long rough, firm and fast greens for a long time. But then last year at Pinehurst, there was no rough. This year at Chambers, there's a little room off the tee, and at Erin Hills, there's a little more room off the tee. How will the U.S. Open look and play, and compare that to some of the other courses that we've seen recently, like an Oakmont, like a Pebble Beach, like things like that?
Well, once again, you have to take each individual 18 holes, if you will, and try and draw out of it what the architect put into it. And I think that's what my boss, Mike Davis, does so well. He fully examines the property and understands, everything that Mr. Jones or Hurdzan put into it and tries to bring that out as part of the test. And yeah, both Chambers Bay and Erin Hills are going to be significantly different. Pinehurst, the same, where there's no rough. But there's other things, great features of all 3 of those golf courses that are going to provide the same challenge, but in a different way than an Oakmont or a Pebble Beach would. Yes, it's not going to be, it'll look certainly different on television. I'm certainly thrilled that the rest of the world is getting to see both these properties in prime time, but it's going to be a different game, a different style. You're not going to be able to come spend 3 practice rounds at Chambers Bay or in Erin Hills and have figured it out. You're not. Playing on fescue grass, only probably the European or international players are going to have some experience on that. As Michael alluded to, the ball reacts differently on a fescue green as it does a bent grass green. There's more of a skip on fescue than where there may be a little bit more of a bite on the bent grass. So there's some unique features of Chambers Bay, which I know Mr. Jones will talk about here in a little bit, that's going to make it different than what you would see normally on a week-to-week at the PGA Tour or at some of the other U.S. Open venues we've hosted at.
And Michael, when you were designing Erin Hills, did you have the idea that, this course could host a U.S. Amateur, a U.S. Open? Was that part of your thought process?
Well, Bob Lang, the original owner, it was a great visionary, and Bob had, or even in the early stages, had confidence that this golf course could rise to that level. I frankly told him, I said, Bob, it's unprecedented that they would play an Open on a new golf course, and he still reminds me of that. I get these little one-word email, unprecedented, you know, and honestly, I didn't really start to believe until some of the executive committee came out and Mike and looked at the golf course and started that enthusiasm, and then there was a little bubbling about, and actually Erin Hills was awarded the women's pub links before the golf course was complete. And so you're thinking, well, it's on the radar. Sure. And then when the amateur came, then it was, yes, we're going to go there, and or sooner or later. And let me explain why I think that it would be explained. Is that both Chambers Bay and Erin Hills primarily are built in the valley, and you've got all these hillsides that go up from that. And at Erin, we were blessed with this huge area that could be a corporate area for all the tents and all of those things. And so at Marion, you had maybe 25,000 or 28,000 people around it. At Erin Hills, you'll have 100,000 people can watch that, and everybody will have a good view because most of the play is down low, and the spectators are going to be up on a very walkable hills that to enjoy that. So, but the fairways are the other difference is that our fairways are really, really wide. There's a couple of them that got narrowed a little bit for the Open setup, but some of them are 100 yards wide. 10 is an example. You can lead the ball up on the top of the hill to the right or left, or you can take it down the right side with a big risk, and if you catch it, you're going to be in the bottom of the valley and cut 100 yards off the shot going in. So the fairways are pretty doggone wide at Erin Hills.
Sounds like fairways even Tiger could hit, right?
Yeah.
All right, we'll open this up.
I don't know about Phil, but I think Tiger could.
We'll open this up to some questions. There's a couple of mics that will be running around. Victoria could run one up. We have a question here in the front.
Hi, and this is a question for Michael. In my company, I'm a different kind of architect. I'm a software architect, and I'm trying to draw some analogies to what you face, which we face, which is what is good enough to get the course out the door. For us, it's software, and how much thinking goes into the tweaking that you believe may need to be done down the road. As we look at software, it's the same thing. How much do we need to do to get the product out the door? And then the planning, I wonder if you could share some thoughts on tweaking and what your thought process is there.
That's a great question. The story, there's an old story that comes to mind of this woodworker that was building this oak door, and he was carefully carving this oak door, and he was working on it, and for days it seemed like, and someone said, you know, to the wood carver, when are you going to be done with this door? And he said, I'll be done with it when they come and take it away from me. And in a lot of ways, that's what it's about, is that we could continue. No one has ever designed a perfect golf course, and we continue to tweak them, and we learn from how the ladies played it and how the amateur played it. We'll learn from how the professionals or the people who qualify for the Open play it, as well as the everyday. I mean, it had to be economically sustainable, and so it has to support, people have to want to come and play there and say it was worth the money. So we continue to tweak it, and as long as we have good rapport with the people and get good feedback, then we can find those solutions. But you know, the ball changes, the game changes a little bit, and we need to respond to that, as well as climate change. You know, we're into a cycle now that who knows what this climate change is going to be and how it's going to affect our golf courses, and we'll be very sensitive to that. So as long as they ask us back, we'll find ways to make it better.
Question here to our right.
Michael, actually, that's you almost hit on what I was going to ask. I wanted you to expand on your thoughts about sustainability, in particular in light of the droughts, et cetera, that may come along with climate change, and what your thoughts are on the prospects for existing and potential future courses, particularly in the desert areas and out in California.
Yes, that's really a good point. You know, there's again a saying that all politics is local. And the reality is all environmental is local, because even though we have this vision of America being having a certain environmental standard, the truth of the matter is actually it's almost by state and area by area. So there's a great deal of variability in what people consider to have high sustainable value. And California is a good example with this lack of water. Now water is the primary driving force that's there, whereas in New England it's biodiversity. In Ohio, we're just trying to keep the algae from growing in Lake Erie, so everywhere we go, there's a little different. And in our discussion we had before this started, the strongest group of environmentalists are not the environmentalists, it's the golf course superintendents and the people who work with them. These guys came into the business, guys, and I use that as a collective term, men and ladies that came into that profession because they care about the environment, they care about growing things, they understand how things work, and if they were given the choice, our golf courses would look a little differently than they do. Unfortunately, North American golfers have place a great premium on green, and so that's really what the driving force is. If we left it up to the golf course superintendents and the golf course architects and the operators, our golf courses would not be nearly as green as maybe they are now. As Mother Nature makes them in the spring green, that's fine. In the summer, if they turn a little brown, they're going to get green in the fall again, and those things. So we need to always temper that when we design a golf course. Is where are we? What are the hot buttons for environmental sustainability? How do we work with the golf course superintendents to make sure that we achieve this golf course that has the least amount of impact in the overall environment? And let me add one of the things too, is that the golf course industry in general, and I don't mean to leave the USGA out, because from the 1920s when Piper and Oakley started working with the USGA to put together to improve golf courses and get us away from haphazard ways that we maintain golf courses, the USGA has funded an enormous amount of research that allowed us to progress our environmental knowledge. And although it may hurt some people like Sierra Club to admit it, and I'm a past member of Sierra Club, but it is the fact that golf courses have used the latest technology, that do soil sensing, that do tissue testing, that are trying to maximize it, is actually causing agriculture to get better, it's causing the lawn industry, everything that's going. And so the USGA has been, and the Golf Course Superintendent Association, have really been driving forces in trying to work to this sustainability. And let me add one more thing. I placed on all of your seats a card from the American Society of Golf Course Architects. By the way, this is all American Society of Golf Course Architects Day because we got Gil and Bob and Forrest and I here. But the last phase on this little card says the United States Golf Association, ASGCA, Environmental Committee was founded in 1970 before the operation of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. So golf courses have been leading the way. We haven't been following.
Question here in the middle. We'll wait for a mic and then we'll run it over. Thank you.
My name is Byron, and I'm curious, when you design a golf course, are you setting the courses up with tees that are short enough to invite new players into the game, to accommodate seniors? It just seems to me that when you see particularly women, ladies out playing golf, that the courses are not designed for them to score well. And, if 10% of the men are single digits, shouldn't 10% of the women be single digits as well?
Thank you for that question. My son is 33 years old. My dad was a golf pro, a club pro, and so when my son could stand, my dad put a club in his hand, and so the kid has played since he was that high, and he's big and strong, and he hits the ball a long way. So my son Chris, who's 33, we play with my mom, who's 92. Mom plays 4 or 5 days a week. And so Chris is almost my business partner. And so we always say, would Grandma be happy with this? And if Grandma can play this hole, and she's a good player, by the way, she's tough to beat at 92, I'm going to tell you. That if Grandma could be happy with this hole, chances are that anybody who's coming into the game could be happy with it. And then again, my son, being young and strong, can hit the ball out of sight. So we plan appropriately. The easiest thing in the world is make the golf course hard. The challenge for us, and we've been in, several of us been in it for 50 years, and we're still trying to unravel to make it fair. Making it hard is easy. Making it fair is always the challenge, and that's the technique we use. So yes, we're extremely cognizant of that. Now we're into family tees, and it isn't because we didn't want to do it. It's because our owners wouldn't allow us to do it. Some of the people who argue the strongest against forward tees are the ladies who really ought to be playing those tees, or the old men like us that ought to be playing those forward tees. But yet, we'll go through those arguments, and so if you left it up to the industry, the golf courses would be a lot more friendly.
I think it's that question over here.
I guess this is a question for both of you, but you talked a lot about wind at Erin Hills and I guess at Chambers, and I'm wondering how much you have to take into account the prevailing wind. And I suppose that would be true on a setup as well. So when you design the course and you think about wind, do you have to think about the prevailing wind, and then do you have to think about the whole, what happens if the prevailing wind doesn't prevail?
Bob can speak to Chambers. At Erin, it's only about 12 miles maybe to the lake, I'm guessing, to Lake Michigan. And so you get the lake effects a certain time of the year, and then as the water heats up in the lake, then you get a shift in the wind and you get more of those north and westerly winds. In June, it's probably going to be a mix. Yeah. If it's a cold spring, you're probably going to get some lake effect winds. If it's a warm spring, you may get some more of the northwesterly winds in there, and so that is going to make a difference. And these are the guys that'll mitigate what those differences are and how those hole plays. They chart very carefully where people are playing and how they're playing, and they'll make those adjustments on the fly. So wind is, it can be extraordinarily, and then when a storm comes in, if we get a storm coming in from the south, it's just everything, you just throw everything in a handbasket. So.
We generally spend, it depends on the site. Erin Hills and Chambers Bay may be a little bit more prep time for Mike, but we're usually in most venues 3-4 years in advance, starting on the golf course setup. And one of the first questions that I would ask is, where's the prevailing wind coming from? If you were to take a look at a yardage guide that I use for my own personal use for setup of the Women's Open or the US Amateur, every single hole, when I flip the page, I have a similar routine that I go through every time before I put the tee markers in the ground. I have written in there, where all my hole locations are, where the prevailing wind is coming from, what tee am I going to use for what day to match with what hole location. My strategy is kind of on paper. So when I get up there, I can look and say, okay, is everything in alignment to where I can actually put the tee markers here? And if the wind shifted, and we're fortunate enough to have a meteorologist on site that tells us absolutely everything that's going on and what times per the day. If the wind shifted, it's pretty common that we would abandon ship and move to something else. Certainly, we don't want to blow a national championship on one small thing like that. If it doesn't feel comfortable, and these were probably the best piece of advice that Mike Davis ever gave me. He goes, Ben, if you don't feel comfortable with it, just don't do it. So the players make a few more birdies on that hole. Great. But if we make one bad mistake, the whole world's going to know about it, and they're going to write about it. I'm happy with a lower scoring average than a higher scoring average in that case.
Bob over here on the right.
This is really directed at Ben. I'd like to hear more about your thinking on match play setups versus medal play setups. And I would think that match play setups would allow you a lot more freedom to set up the course. In particular, I would assume there are pin positions you will put on a match play golf course that you would never put in a medal play context.
Certainly.
That there are all sorts of things you would do differently. And I'd just love to hear hear you think out loud a bit about how you approach those things differently.
Sure, certainly in match play, you're playing your opponent. You're not playing against the rest of the field. So you can be a little bit more aggressive in how you set up the golf course. Terrible jokes that we administrators make that, sometimes in match play we laugh about, does the hole even need to be on the green? Let's just put it in the bunker. And they still got to get in the hole in the least amount of strokes, right? So it's just, Michael and I are playing each other. We just got to get in the least amount of strokes. So terrible joke that we use from time to time. But you're right, we can certainly be more aggressive in match play. And like I said, we strategize for match play. We don't necessarily strategize for stroke play. And I can think back to 2011, with our companion course at Blue Mound in Milwaukee. We used that golf course for 2 days. It's 156 play Erin Hills, 156 play Blue Mound, and then they switch, play another round, and then we have a cut. So ultimately, we're only picking one whole location in stroke play at Erin Hills and at Blue Mound for the stroke play portion of the U.S. Amateur. It's one whole location. We use it for 2 days. So when you're trying to set up on the co-host course, or Blue Mound in this case, great old Seth Rayner, big greens, you would think that, you would put them in the hardest places everywhere you go because you're only going there once. But remember, we got to have some balance in the setup. You got to have some, easy, medium, hard, if you will. You got to have plenty of lefts, rights, up the middles, so on and so forth. So, there's plenty of times where we're going to venues where, this venue is known for producing, over par results when U.S. Opens have been held here. Well, we're not shooting for over par results in the stroke play portion of the championship. That's not where the championship is won. And another terrible thought inside from a golf administrator, a lot of you in here are museum and history committee and architecture buffs and have a knack for remembering things. I don't. I've got a good memory, but it's only short term. I go to most of these venues and I say, do you remember who your medalist in stroke play was when the U.S. Amateur was held here? Most of them don't. They just remember who the champion actually was. So is it important? Absolutely. But, at the end of the day, like I mentioned earlier, it's about those two players in the end. And, just like, I guess, the Final Four, you got to figure out your way to maneuver through the bracket, and each step that you take, each round that you play in match play is going to be a little bit different. So we're going to save our best strategies for that portion of the championship.
A lot of questions. We'll go Wayne right there.
Thanks. Mike, this is for you. You've designed courses all around with different topographies, climates, soils, and that yields a lot of differentiation between designs. But from an architectural perspective, what are you doing that's new and different that, now versus what you've been, what you've done out in the past?
That's really a very good question. There are certain timeless principles of design that aren't going to change. How you present them are going to be the things that change a little bit. Lots of times I go back and I look at a golf course that we had done in the past and I go, what the hell were we thinking here, Well, it was a different time and place and the game was different. And then specifically, the things that are different is we made greens a lot steeper back in the 70s and 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s than we do now. We used to go to 4% putting slopes. Now we're at 2.5% or less, and we try to get down to 2%. And so greens are a lot flatter. Well, when you flatten the green, now, and the ball is not going to hold as well because you don't have as much slope that you're playing into. So now you got to think about, okay, where are we playing it from, and how is this green going to react, and how much run out do I need? So I refer to, even though it wasn't an intended use, I use the USGA course rating handbook 66% probability table for target areas, and I try to work everything so that 2 out of 3 times a scratch golfer or a bogey golfer can hit that particular target area. So that's one thing. We use a lot fewer. The most expensive thing on the golf course to build and maintain are bunkers. On a square foot basis, by far, the most expensive thing is bunkers. So we have really limited the amount of bunkers that we use, and we're trying to use them a lot more judiciously. Phil was showing me some pictures of the road hole bunker at the old course, St. Andrews, and you know, when you think about that, it's that one little piddly bunker that causes everybody so much grief. I mean, Rory McIlroy putted into it last year in the Dunhill Cup. And so we're trying to use fewer bunkers and then use the slopes around them to fit in. It's a lot more sophisticated way of doing things. So fewer bunkers, flatter greens, more tees, and better grasses are the things I would say when we're trying to work to.
Time for two more questions. Go one over there.
Yeah, Mr. Hurdzan, I have the distinct pleasure of playing one of your co-creations, a WAPL host, Neshannock Valley, right down the road from here.
Thank you.
And it's a very enjoyable course, and thank you very much.
Thanks.
I probably have a dozen questions, but I'll leave it to one. The turf is quite extraordinary. You just kind of mentioned that. I'll play the course in March. Well, not this last March, I guess, but but March, June, October, November, December, and it's quite consistent. And then in the spring now it's playing a little bit slow, and then in the summer it'll play quite fast. Where do these turfs come from, and who develops them? And it's a great. And just one quick question for
Sure.
Brian. After Mike is done, do you remember anything specific about setting up the WAPL at Neshannock?
Thank you. And then Darren, the superintendent, is a guy that should get all that credit. We selected the turf, but we in conjunction with the superintendent. But to answer, this is a very good point, and the USGA has funded a lot of that research that has allowed it. It used to be that back in 1950 was the first seeded bent grass, pure seeded bent grass, Pencross. Before that, we used old German bents, and barn sweepings and everything else, and the greens. And so, and then Scott's came out with the first patented grass, which was Windsor, and that was in like the mid '60s or so. And all of a sudden now, there is an economic incentive to start to develop these grasses. So we have plant breeders who are starting to look at doing these selection varieties, and then someone comes up with this gene mutation or transgender, not gender, but transgenetic, well, it could be that too.
Yeah, it could be.
I never know about some of these, yeah. But transgenetic mutations, and now these guys are so good, and just a few miles from here at Rutgers University has been a leader for 40 years in the development of these grasses. So we look for grasses that when we go to a golf course site, one of the first things we do is we analyze it for the water quality. We want to know the amount of water and the quality of that water, because the quality of the water determines how salt resistant grasses, so it changes the variety of grasses we use. The second thing we're going to look at is microclimates. Where are going to be the most stressful part of this golf course? And now we try to find grasses that will handle the microclimate and are happy with the water and will provide a good playing surface. And so yes, it's very subtle. It's benign to most golfers, but it's exceedingly important because just as you point out, you got very consistent putting surfaces or playing surfaces, and yet it uses less water, fertilizer, and pesticide to maintain that. Bluegrass, yeah, and you know what? Bluegrass is coming back. If I were to do my own golf course, I would make bluegrass fairways. There's a variety called low-mow bluegrass that instead of growing up, it kind of grows sideways, and it's nice and tight, and it heals better. You can mow it at 3/4 of an inch instead of a half, so that moves the ball up a 1/4 inch further in the club face, and that makes a big difference to average players. It's like when people go play on zoysia, they go, God, I love this grass. Well, yeah, every shot's teed up, so the bluegrasses, I think, will come back, and not only in the roughs, but we'll see them in a lot more in the fairways and tees.
To answer the second part of your question, unfortunately, I wasn't involved with the WAPL that was at Neshannock. I'm embarrassed to admit I probably only got 5 rounds. I probably only had 7 rounds of golf in my life in the state of New Jersey, and I've lived here 10 years. Embarrassed. I guess I spend too much time in this building.
Yeah. Go last question. I saw a gentleman in the back. Wait for the microphone, please.
I really enjoyed Erin Hills. What I enjoyed about it was the routing. And I had a question about a stretch of 3 holes, which is 8, 9, 10. So that's an uphill par 4, very dramatic up. Then there's a really super little par 3 of about 150 yards. And then the current 10th, which is a long shot up the ridge. So I had 2 questions, just a little bit about if part of that stretch is a little bit of a mind game for the higher class players. And also, I understand that 10 may have been changed from its first iteration.
Right.
Thanks.
Thank you. Number 8 used to be number 9, because at one time we thought the clubhouse was going to be about where number 9 green was going to be, and not on the other side. So we thought that 9 green, or the clubhouse would be around 11 green, 9 green, in that area there, looking at in what I call the West Meadows. But the fire department said, we can't get a fire truck in here, we're not going to let you build it. So that it got put on the other side, or something to that effect. So 8, which used to be 9, 8 is basically unchanged. And we knew the driving area on that hole was falls away from left to right. And it makes it, you really have to take it on the inside line and risk the rough, or you're going to be down into the right rough trying to play to that green. And then it's a full carry, as you know, to 8 green. 9 was always there. We actually looked at it when Ron and I were looking at one day. We looked at it from 18 green and going, it looks just as good from over here. So any direction you look at that green, it'll look good. And so that one is unchanged. 10, the hole that you're speaking about, used to be a longer par 5, and it had a Barrett's green. It had a deck, and then there was a big valley, and then another deck behind it. The problem was that most people couldn't play up the second shot far enough to see where, so they were playing blind into a Barrett's green, and that wasn't very favorable. So the decision was made, okay, well, let's just drop back and make the 10th hole shorter and put the green where just beyond the driving area of 10, about where the second shots would go. And that's how that new green on 10 came about. Yeah. The old green, by the way, for the old Barrett's green is back there. Is if you go back towards 11T where they're going to play, you'll see the old green, the formation of it's still there.
You can use it on one day, you don't have to use it on.
Yeah. If we used that, we wouldn't worry about them coming back.
Michael, Ben, thank you so much. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.